الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أصحاب السعادة، حضورنا الأفاضل، المشاركون والمشاركات الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم جميعاً في هذا الصباح الجميل من صباحات مسقط العامرة التي تحتضن فعاليات الندوة الدولية حول التحول في النظام الإحصائي لدول المجلس، الإنتاجية وتحدي الطلب المتزايد للإحصاءات في ثاني أيامها وثاني جلساتها، حيث ستتناول هذه الجلسة محور الابتكارات في مجال الإحصاءات الرسمية، وسيثري هذا المحور بالنقاش نخبة من المختصين سنتعرف عليهم بعد أن نعرف بالمتحدث الرئيسي لهذه الجلسة، وهو الأستاذ الدكتور شونغ، المدير السابق لشعبة الإحصاء في الأمم المتحدة من سنغافورة الصديقة. إذن الأستاذ الدكتور شونغ هو أستاذ في السياسات الاجتماعية ومحلل في جامعة سنغافورة الوطنية. عمل لفترة تسع سنوات كمدير لشعبة الإحصاء بالأمم المتحدة في نيويورك من العام 2004 وحتى العام 2012، وقام خلال عمله بالأمم المتحدة في تطوير نظام الإحصاءات الدولية بجانب تنسيق عمل لجنة الإحصاء بالأمم المتحدة. في عام 2011 قامت الأمم المتحدة باعتماد مبادرته الخاصة بإنشاء المنصة بين الحكومات لمعالجة قضايا إدارة المعلومات المكانية. وقبل التحاقه بالأمم المتحدة عمل رئيساً للجهاز الإحصائي في سنغافورة في الفترة من عام 1991 وحتى العام 2004، وهو مستشار لعدد من الحكومات وحاصل على عدد من الجوائز الوطنية والمهنية. عاد إلى سنغافورة في يناير 2013. إذن باسمكم جميعاً أرحب بالمتحدث الرسمي للجلسة الثانية الأستاذ الدكتور شونغ.
Thank you. Good morning. It's good to be here again among all the friends, and I'm happy to say that I know all the head of statistical officers in this region and personally. And every time I come back here, I feel very fresh because it's good to be able to renew friendship. My job today is to set the stage on this very important topic called the innovation in official statistics. I'm supposed to be also the convener of this group, and in this session we have very distinguished speakers, and I'm very happy that we are able to get them. I will just very briefly introduce them first, and then later on maybe the MC will also introduce them. First of all, we are happy to have Lewis, Dr. Tom Lewis, the Associate Director of U.S. Census Bureau and the Chief Scientist for the Census Bureau. As you know, that Census Bureau is really an innovator in capturing information, in creating computerization for official statistics. In fact, in this chart, the first photograph is from Census Bureau. Well, the old computers that were used for compiling, computing census population way back in 1871, Tom? Something like that, you know. You were right in the middle of it, you know. Do you see that? Yeah. And then we also have Dr. Enrique de Alba, who is from Mexico. And Mexico is a leader in combining statistics and geographic information, and we will hear an exciting presentation from him. And we have Dr. Vanessa Lawrence, who is the Director General of UK's Ordnance Survey, who is also the co-chair of the UN initiative on global geographic information management. And Vanessa will give a perspective on how the geospatial information will enrich the kind of work that we do. And of course, we also have His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Amma, who is from Bahrain, who is the board director of GCC Stat, and and at the same time, who is the president of the Central Informatic Organization, which I understand is also a new model, bringing all the information together under one roof and doing a lot of innovative stuff. So we have a very strong panel. So my job is much easier. I only have to give the outline and give the framework, and then I should go down and let them do the talking. But since, Sabah said I had to say something, so I will very quickly introduce the framework for innovation in official statistics. What is innovation? Innovation, we're talking about new ideas and device or methods and the art of the process of introducing new ideas. And we did, in official statistics, we have this Oslo manual, came out in 2005, supposed to teach us how to measure innovation, not only in statistics, but in the whole society, whole economy. And this is the definition that we use. Innovation is implementation of a new, significantly improved product, so on and so forth. And it also applies in official statistics. So we know what we are talking about because we are supposed to measure innovation in our work. So we had, when I was director of UNSD, I organized a seminar in 2009 on innovation in official statistics. It was a very interesting seminar, 2009 at that time. And we realized something that innovation is not only from a developed country, but also from a lot of developing countries. There are many new ways of doing things, new way of compiling, analyzing, disseminating statistics. And in this particular website, you can still see all the papers and the documents. So I encourage you to go and take a look. But nowadays, when you look at official statistics, there are a lot of catchphrases. We are talking about modernization of official statistics. We are talking about re-engineering statistics. Let me just quickly draw a distinction that this word means different things. I think in modernization, we are talking about really improving, upgrading, catching up with the technology. And when we talk about re-engineering, we are really fine-tuning the process, increasing productivity. So very much work focus. But when we come to innovation, we are talking about ideas. We are talking about new, innovative, novel ideas. And so it's different paradigm, completely different kind of paradigm from modernization and re-engineering. Right now, in the standard statistical process, I use this as a guide, and then later on I will go very quickly into the components. We talk about the input, the kind of information we use to do our work. And this input, all the sources of information coming through, surveys, data, and whatever things we collect our information, the CPI prices, the investment figures, surveys, and UNSD, and together with other international organizations, we set the measurement framework for all this input data. So very clear-cut, no issue there. And then when we know what to collect, and when we collect the data, we process it, and then we come up with the output. So the production is very much guided by the computerization and how much technology we put in to compile, to capture, and then to analyze the data. Then finally, the output. How do we display our results? And this is really guided by a little bit of the convention of the day. If everybody using pie chart, you also want to use pie chart. If somebody using bubble graph, now it's very popular, people are also using bubble graph. But these three basic blocks are the area that we are talking about innovation, are potential areas for innovation. Now, let me quickly go through some examples from my point of view about what are the innovations in these three distinct areas: input, production, and output. Let me talk about input first. Input, there are tremendous changes in data sources. Traditional surveys are just too slow. We need it for benchmark, we need it for compiling CPI, we need it for as an important benchmark on some of the attributes. But most of the time, if you want to use a survey, it takes some time to get the data out. And the politicians are very impatient. And they will look to other sources for information. Because very often, the policymakers they don't need a very precise number. They need something to tell them that whether they are correct or wrong, whether they are right or wrong. And they say if you can give them 2 years' time that whether they are right or wrong, that's just taking too long. They need it right now before they make an announcement. So what do we do then in that case? Well, we try to speed up. Now we have a multimodal data collection, getting very popular now. We started in Singapore, trimodal, using phone, using internet, and using the call. And then we have now active passive data collection, and so on and so forth. But the most important revolution in this aspect on the input of data is really the big data, the administrative data, and the geospatial. Administrative data, we know it all. I mean, how to harness e-government and all the administrative data for our use in statistical compilation is new for many of us, but also it's not exactly new because the Nordic countries have been doing it for years. You know, they go back 200 years in using birth registers in churches and all this for collecting, for compiling population statistics. So it's not really an innovation. But big data and geospatial are indeed, I think, innovations. Let me give you some example. Big data. This is the mobile phone positioning data for tourism statistics. This example comes from Estonia. In Europe, when they measure tourism arrival, because there's no forms to fill in, they depend on hotel accommodation surveys. But not everybody stays in hotel, and not everybody who stays in hotel will fill in a form or the hotel will be able to register. So the bottom line shows the result from the accommodation survey. And now, because every tourist have a mobile phone, and then they track the number of tourists coming into the country when they switch the user to the mobile phone company. So the top line is the mobile phone, foreign mobile phones registered in that particular country. Look at the pattern. Same trend, different level. Now that's what we want. New sources of information giving us a better measurement on the same phenomena. I think this is innovation. This is China. China have a PPI, Producer Price Index. They also have a price index based on, from the internet, all the purchases. And you see the tracking is very nice. And this using Twitter to tweeting about the price of rice, again, from big data. And then you see the food price inflation corresponds quite closely when people start tweeting about the price of rice. So in other words, when people get excited about the price of rice and start tweeting about it, there is something happening in respect to rice. And in this case, it's the price that's going up. And interesting correlation. But on the geospatial side, and the key is really how do you link data with the space? And our data, most of the time, when we go and do a survey, they are not coded to the location. But now, increasingly, a lot of policy are directed to a particular location. And so we are not, when we're talking about development, we are not talking about development for the whole country. We will talk about development for the whole country. But most of the time, the policy are focusing on a small area. And so location information framework become important. And when I was in the UNSD, I spent the last few years of my time there pushing this integration framework. And I managed to get ABS to come out a paper, and that was considered in 2013, February, when I just left, to propose a statistical spatial framework, SSF, to bring the two communities together so that the information can be used even more for more problem-solving skills. And this, for example, this is the 3D population analysis, this Palm Springs. They show the number of black people by district in 2000 and 2010. And you look at the black blocks, you can see it very vividly, using a 3D modeling and showing the numbers. So this is very different from the way that we present our data in the past and the way we analyze our data in the past. We can do this because the information is geocoded, they're displayed nicely over a particular location frame, and then we can show this kind of analysis. On a different scale, this is the global scale, but you can do it on the regional space scale. This is a map coming from the China's satellite. They have a scan, 30-meter resolution. In this case, they're detecting urban land surface water, the water on top of the land. And they show all these things. And then they condense it and put it into a global map, and then they release it. So when they demonstrate this to some of the countries, some countries say, wow, I didn't even know that in my country how much surface water I have. But the thing is not just looking at the maps. The map's interesting, and we can use it for a lot of sustainable analysis. But the key, this is just illustrations, but the key is that they can come out with the numbers. So in this case, there's a real integration. They can satellite scan the amount of water, and then they translate that into numbers, and we can track the numbers. So you can do this not only for the world, you can do it for the region, and I hope the GCC region will take this on down the road, and also for countries. And you can do it for other attributes. I'm just using this as an example. But the next frontier is really in we call this dynamic complex system analysis. In other words, the bottom line is that most of the time, we only have a little bit of data. How can we generalize this bit of data and come out with what we call now synthetic population estimates? So this is from Sweden. When they use some survey data, and then they generated a map and analyze it at different districts on a synthetic population and synthetic distribution. This is a map for modeling the racial diversity in New York about different ethnic groups and their distribution. The bottom line here is this. We know that sometimes the information cannot come in quick enough. Then what do? We must have new methods, new approaches, new solutions to find out, to meet the information needs of the policymakers. So synthetic population now has taken on, and these are the products of what they call the data scientists, the way they model the things. And I was told that the Tom from Census Bureau will talk more about this either. But from input, let me just quickly summarize the input is that we have now to gear up to meet new kind of data sources, from big data, from geospatial information, from synthetic calculations, modelings. Just relying on survey data, on administrative data, may not be enough to answer all the questions that your country will face, that we have to answer. And so we have no choice but to explore all these new data sources and to be innovative in using them. This is re-engineering the production process, how to do things faster. We know that some countries now are going into opinion polls, and then we are now also doing rapid assessments, make quick survey, go in, go out, which they do it quite a bit in public health, quick vector surveys. So speed is the key, and of course now is a big movement on web surveys, and then using the web as a basis of data collection, and then going through all this. And we have seen a lot of innovations in this also. The question, of course, is on productivity. Are we happy with the current way we are collecting data and managing the data process, and how can we improve it? So in European Conference of Statisticians, they compose their statistical production process, generic framework, they call it GSBPM, Generic Statistical Business Production Model. This is no big deal, you know it. They just break it down into different components and the sub-component. So it's a good framework. The question now is how can we make use of this framework to improve on it? And so that's what the European Conference of Statisticians are working on now. And then, but they found out that the old framework is too narrow, just focusing on the production process. So now they're thinking of this new generic statistical information model, GSIM. Basically, what is recognized is that production is only a small part. You must bring in business, you must bring in structures, you must bring in concepts. So, and in the end, you have the two coming together. So the work is still ongoing. It If you attend the European Conference of Statisticians, you will know that they are still discussing this. Whether there's any innovation coming out or not, we don't know yet. But I think the model is good. At least we know what we are focusing. But we know also that other people have used very aggressively new way of collecting data. Korea, Singapore, we started using internet in the year 2000. Response rate 15%. 2010, 10 years later, Korea used the internet, response rate 60%. And now in Singapore, all our surveys are internet-based. The respondents, they like it, it's fast, it's convenient, for us, we like it because it's error-free and good quality. And Korea internet for the census, 60%. I was told that Canada had done it, and they are very happy with the result. I was told that Australia, they're going to launch a 5-year census pretty soon, and they're going to use it. Internet data collection is going to be the model of the day in the future. And Korea has done a lot of experimentations on various things, and I will leave it to study there. Then there's also innovation in data exchange. In the past, we transfer data by tape or by CD and all that stuff, and now we use metadata exchange. Data, we set up a data registry, everybody put it into the registry, and then you can draw from the registry. So this is being experimented in quite a number of countries now, and many countries now are trying to set up such a data exchange model, a new kind of a data exchange protocol to facilitate the sharing of the information. This is the core of an e-government. E-government helps citizens to get the government services faster, but at the back end, you need to exchange information. And how do you exchange information in the most efficient, most productive way? You have to improve your exchange protocol. And I think this new model, using the registry, and then everybody putting in there, everybody drawing from it, I think is the most efficient and I think productive approach. So this is the Italy's data archival system, very fancy, but tells basically the same thing. I just put it there so that you can admire the Italian beauty, They do their charts in a very nice way. So finally, output. We all know that output is becoming more and more important. Our usual charts and graphs and pipe and is no longer acceptable. You come out with a traditional statistical bulletin. You don't have fancy graphs. People say, oh, this is so old-fashioned. So old-fashioned. I mean, I don't even dare nowadays to come out with a report without any colorful charts. People will just ignore it. And so we are now in a different era. We have to bring the message to the audience, to the users in a nicer way, because there's so much competition. If your presentation is no good, people are not going to look at it. Then how do we do it? And what are the examples? Well, in the old rule, this from Alan Smith from ONS, this guy, William Farr, from 19th century, he used to say that the data should not be nice, should not be beautiful. The drier, the better. Statistics should be the driest of all reading, because we are talking about facts. And then, of course, that has completely changed. That if we continue with this approach, that statistics is the most driest subject matter, then we will lose our job, for sure. And so this is the old rule. But the new rule is a lot more interesting. This is what I did in Singapore, looking at a number of elderly people over the district. So I have the street map, and on top of it, I have a heat map, and show the concentration of the older people with some attributes. It's a different way of presenting. But I think this one looks a lot more appealing than our usual graphs and usual charts. This is the Oman's mobile geospatial platform. And nowadays, bringing the geospatial information together with statistical information straight to your mobile phone. And this was just launched not too long ago, 2 days ago, in COMEX. I think the data layer is still not very good yet, but this is the way to go. Bringing information out to the people in the most convenient way and using an integrated platform. In Vienna, they put the census data on the web, and people can go in and play with it and have some visual display. I'm quite sure Tom will say more about this when he talks about US Census Bureau. In Singapore, we have a system of capturing doctors' diagnosis from over 1,000 clinics. This is the real-time diagnosis of a particular disease. So in this case, this particular disease, upper respiratory tract infection, in real time, we know where the disease concentrated in. If we have, say, a dengue fever or an outbreak, we know where it is. This is the real-time information. Now, this is capturing big data together with official statistics and displaying them in a very neat manner on a real-time basis. I think this is the ultimate what the official statisticians can do. And of course, our friend Hans Rosling, many of you have heard him speak before, and he's the bubble chart, the famous. And this, the Netherlands dashboard, came out only a few years ago, now becoming the standard, more or less. Everybody must have a dashboard. It's good, and then it's useful. And that is definitely an innovation. Putting a lot of information into one single page. The bar there, every bar is an indicator. You go there, you will see what it's all about. So much information condensed into one single page. That's what a dashboard is all about. So I have quickly go through the 3 steps from what I see as the innovations. I think the speakers will contribute more. And then, but what are the conclusions? We are in the world of possibilities. New data sources, new product lines, improved productivity. Our policymakers are getting more demanding. If we cannot meet the challenge, they will go to somebody else. They will go to somebody else, for sure. So we now have to take advantage of technology. We have to improve our data analytics. If we don't improve our internal capabilities, the data scientists will take over the world. They don't have any domain knowledge, but because they're good in the computer, they know how to do the data analysis, they will come up with some conclusion and feed it to the policymakers. And then we will be trying to explain why they are not so good. We will be on the defensive. So we have to climb the ladder as well and meet this particular challenge. So we have to have a new image, we have new capabilities, and we have to prepare for future changes. The question, of course, for us to answer today is, are we ready for this new challenge? We need to improve our capabilities quite a bit. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I will now ask the other speakers to come and give their take on this innovation. Yeah. Thank you very much. If the MC, no, if there's no MC, then I will invite Tom, Lewis.
Well, thank you, and it is an honor and a pleasure to participate in this inaugural event for GCC STAT, and I do congratulate the Gulf Cooperation Council for this important and impressive accomplishment. Now I have to see if I'm good at this. So the Census Director, John Thompson, regrets he can't be here. We have a scientific advisory committee meeting in DC today and tomorrow, and it's his first occasion to be there, and he really thought he should since it's his committee, and so I am representing the Bureau. And before I start, I'll say that I've put much more in this presentation than I will say, and actually much more than you'll be able to read, because I understand that these slides will be posted on the web eventually, and I thought I would have at least sort of a self-contained presentation. I will go over the high points and make a few comments on each slide, but not in any way try to give you every word that you'll see. And in some cases, it's simply the number of words for the moment that you can look at and later go back. But I have to start by saying the logo is just fabulous. I mean, not only the logo, but the jumble over there. If we needed something to give a message that statistics shouldn't be and doesn't need to be dry, just this fun jumble of numbers that are both important because they're numbers, but enjoyable due to the graphic and the colors is really great. I mean, we need to do more of that kind of thing. So I'm going to do a little bit on the Bureau, just one slide, a few examples where I give a few detailed comments, not deep details, but at least a few comments, a list of other activities, a bit on international programs, and then we were asked, I think I remember we were asked to prognosticate on the future, and so I'll give a few of my own prognostications. Here's the Bureau on one slide, and again, I'm not going to go through the list, but simply to say there are lots of activities in addition to the decennial census, which is the only thing the US Constitution requires that the Bureau does. And so it's the only thing that Congress is required to fund. Everything else has to be on the basis of the merits, at least in some sense, whether they be political or scientific or sociological. We do a lot of work, contract work, where in fact Congress doesn't give the money, but we have arrangements with other parts of the federal statistical system or with other countries. And we do not only the sociological demographic census, but every 5 years an economic census. And so there are lots of words there that can be read later. One of the big innovations, and Paul actually mentioned it, that we are doing, and at least from my roots in biostatistics, is something that is a very active area in biomedicine, and that is adaptive design. So the idea is to not only come up with a good plan a priori for how one would try to get information from a respondent, and let's say initially by the web, but as a survey goes on, both for individuals in the survey and for a group of individuals, in at least as close to real time as you can, process the information and decide whether you should switch the mode for a person to go from, say, internet to hard copy or internet to telephone contacts, or to have a reallocation of resources in general to encourage certain groups to respond and not discourage, but not necessarily spend resources encouraging other groups. And then there are also rules, ideas on stopping rules of saying we have enough information, let's not waste resources on that last 5% that will take 90% of the resources, let's decide to stop. So I'll give one example. We have a survey which is called the National Survey of College Graduates, and it is a multi-mode example that in fact is operating as I speak, although it's in the middle of the night, so probably not exactly as I speak. And the idea is to, in real time, overnight time, decide what to do with individual respondents, and in this case, starting with the internet and then eventually moving to telephone interviews, or to not spend any more effort on that person. And this graphic at least gives the idea. I'm not giving you the formula, and I hope you appreciate that, but there's something called an R indicator, in fact, lots of them. In this case, a value of 0 means that a subgroup is responding at the same rate as other subgroups. So 0 would mean you're right on the response rate of others. That doesn't mean that necessarily the response rate is good. It could be that everybody's at 20%, but at least the representation is equal. And you can see that top curve, the orange or whatever color it looks like here, is overrepresented, that subgroup. And so the idea in real time was to not spend resources in terms of telephone reminders and so on that group, not to try to discourage them, but to work hard on some of those groups that are below 0 to try to bring them up. And you'll notice that there was at least some success in this. And there are many other examples you can give about this encouragement or at least back off on effort kind of design to balance the books in real time and spend the energy where you find the best benefit. Now, to do that, and again, Paul had a diagram, so I'll have my diagram, that you really have to have near real-time processing so that you can literally overnight or at least quickly decide on what to do with individual respondents. And this is nothing more than a diagram at the moment, but it is a concept that is both in practice for that National Survey of College Graduates, but in development for the 2020 census and to be used in all of our other surveys as time goes on. And the only point I'll make with that diagram is that that center blue bar is a common communication mode that is going to set standards for input and output and metadata standards, so that each survey will still have to have its own features, but that the IT systems won't have to be developed for every single survey in a one-off kind of way, but that we can have as much commonality as possible and then spend our energy on the unique features that are needed for each survey. Another big issue, and it's big in general, but it's becoming more acute, I believe, with the onset of big data, in the sense that there are many data sources and information sources that are available to triangulate and find out who's in a survey and maybe what their income is and so on, that the concern, at least in the US, about protecting identities of respondents is even more acute than it used to be. And I like to kind of use a diagram that is really from my other life, which is coincident with this life, and that is biostatistics. This is a curve that really comes from an operating characteristic curve for a diagnostic test, where in that case, the x-axis would be false positive rates for declaring disease when there is no disease, and the vertical axis would be true positive rate. And of course, what you'd like to do is have a high true positive rate and a very low false positive rate, but there are trade-offs. You can't kind of increase one without wrecking the other. The labels I have here, which you may be able to read and may not, that the x-axis is disclosure risk, and the y-axis is provided information. And what you'd like to do here is to provide a lot of information with as little disclosure risk as possible. You'd like this curve to go very steeply vertical before it starts curving off to the right. So it's the same mnemonic that we need to worry about, if you'd like, in disclosure avoidance. And there are lots of ways to protect in terms of identity, and I've listed a few here. The one in blue is not, as Paul was doing synthetic populations, this is more synthetic data for a given data set. And so the idea, if you look at the bullets below that synthetic data phrase, is that you actually build, ideally, a Bayesian model of the actual data that you'd like to post. So if you have a complicated set of items, you'll build a model with lots of interactions, with as much complexity as you would want the analyst to be able to discover. But instead of posting the data set, you post a random version of that data set that's a sample from the distribution that the Bayesian model has given, so that it's got a lot of the same structure, it's got more noise in it, but you should be able to discover and estimate a regression slope and other things, for example. It also has the chance, because it isn't the real data, that it fuzzes things substantially, that at least it's harder to identify either an entity that's a business or an individual. So that kind of process is used for something called, and you can go to the census website, On the Map, where you can pick your location in the US at the moment and look at, for example, in the blue coding there, the dots, the bigger and the darker they are higher intensity of economic activity of businesses, both number of employees and if you'd like, output. And the circle in windrow on the right is commuting patterns and intensity of commuting. And so you get an idea of where people are coming from and where they're going in terms of their jobs. The right-hand panel was looking at Hurricane Sandy, where the blue again in New Jersey and other areas was the intensity of business activity. And the plume was certainly not the Census Bureau's, but another example of combining information was NOAA's probability region for where it was going to strike, and it struck not only there but everywhere. And in fact, this was to give at least an idea of the possible impact of the hurricane's strike, and it actually, I think, was even greater than one would have imagined. So the 2020 census and the 2010 and the 2000 and the 2030, the good news is that it only happens every 10 years, and the bad news is that it only happens every 10 years. And so that it's difficult to keep up the intensity, if you'd like, of innovation with the 2020 census or the others. We start early in the decade, and we have started to build innovations that include the adaptive design approach, use of the internet to start with, sending a hard copy form if a specific individual or demographic group has waited too long and it's worth spending the money, going to telephone calls and or personal visits, and eventually, and the eventual may be very soon, very quickly, using administrative records. And so the idea will be, and we're testing them in field right now, is to have a multi-mode approach where the exact sequence and the timing will depend a bit on performance of that same group or that same location in the 2010 census, also information coming from the American Community Survey and other aspects. And so I've highlighted in blue a few of the things that are at least on the top of the list, but there are just a lot of other aspects that are being built, including should we let the enumerators who have to go in the field and eventually try to interview people that have not responded, should we let them use their own smartphone with our software and our protections on it and so on, or is that impractical? And again, there's a long list and I've just highlighted a few things. One of the things we are doing though is a micro simulation, an agent-based model if you'd like, to kind of look at the consequences of both different decision rules on contact strategies, on adaptive designs, but also the consequences of uncertainties of the inputs. For example, it may be that 60% is the best guess for the response by internet for a certain group, but it has uncertainty to it because it's an estimate. And if we build in that uncertainty along with the binomial uncertainty of yes or no for an individual household, eventually you get a probability distribution for performance of a census. And so the idea is that every household is an agent imbued with its own attributes: probability of responding by the internet, quality of their response, relevance of local administrative records that might be used to supplement or say substitute for the responses, and a whole vector, if you'd like, of other attributes, some that are estimated very well, others that are nothing more than expert opinion with some uncertainty. And so the idea is we run the simulator and you get a point cloud. You only get to do one census every 10 years, but this is a cartoon version where the red dots all seem to fall within what you might think of as a sufficiently high quality and a sufficiently low cost to be an acceptable census from the economic and other points of view. The blue cloud, which is again a cartoon version labeled A, if you can see in the middle there, on average it's a little better. It's lower and to the right, but many more of those census dots are outside of the acceptable region. And so if you were to try to choose between A and B, you would definitely go with B, which on average isn't going to do as well, but has a very high likelihood of being successful. And so this agent-based model tries to build in stochastic uncertainties. And here's just an example. I don't expect you to read it either now or maybe even on the web, but it's a household cascading down this decision tree of, was it an occupied residence? If so, did they respond by the internet? If not, are the administrative records sufficiently high quality, or do we need to send somebody out into the field? And eventually cascading down that pachinko machine to a response along with its quality attribute, and in fact, if they haven't responded, a projected cost of the field operation. And that kind of thing generates the real version of that kind of a cartoon thing, where we are running scenarios, playing around with different inputs, I shouldn't say playing around, specifying different inputs, and studying, in addition to how well the census might work, but where are the high leverage uncertainties that require a little more research to pin something down to get that point cloud to be a little more narrow. Big data. It's obviously in the news, and we will all be talking about it. Some of us have decided to start calling it not small data because we're a little tired of the phrase big data. And there was an article in Science magazine recently where the proposal was to start looking at all data and not worry about whether it's big or small. And I think that's a theme that Paul has produced too. Even Google Flu, which was mentioned yesterday, recent analyses, and I think 3 weeks ago in Science magazine, an analysis of current performance shows that it's actually not working so well as predicting the government-produced number. Google has changed its algorithm, not to try to make it work more poorly, but I think it's an example of where we have to be very careful not to think of big data as necessarily big information and not necessarily valid information. Traditional values still apply. I want to know the sampling plan, or if I don't know the sampling plan, I want to calibrate against a solid benchmark, an aid to navigation, i.e. well-done survey data that at least becomes the centerpiece, and then build on it, no question about it. So there are a lot of challenges and concerns. There are a lot of upsides to it also, and Paul has mentioned many of them. And so I think careful use of big data and not getting too enamored with it, but also not being too pessimistic about it, is the right way to go. We have lots of big data activities going on. How could we not? We have to at least deal with things as they come in and try to be at least a little bit ahead of the curve. Some of it has to do with pipelines of data coming from commercial entities that instead of doing surveys, we're working on developing a way to have things with appropriate metadata come in somewhat real time. We're doing all sorts of other things, including if you look at the second to last bullet, we have a course taking place, which started 3 weeks ago for census staff on the analysis of big data. 24, I think, staff in it now. We'll do a few more cycles of that, and then hope to be able to hand it off to the University of Maryland's Joint Program and Survey Methodology to keep that going and keep not just the Census Bureau, but the federal statistical system hopefully ahead of the curve in some places, but at least hanging on by our fingernails to the curve in many other places. We have a big data lab where we can do a lot of experimentation without, if you'd like, going public, with having pilot studies and so on. Okay, and here's where I'm not going to read it all. Here are at least a subset of other research activities, and there are many, and I won't bother trying to read many to you or any of them to you. When you look on the web, you'll be able to see. I think the point is, we at the Census Bureau, and I suppose specifically the Research and Methodology Directorate, which has been given the assignment of being the brand name for research, not to be a monopoly operation, but to be a generator of energy, we have a lot going on, and hopefully much of it will be successful. We have a lot going on in the international arena, and at the top I'm just listing a little bit of the kind of phrases that you can see if you go to the Census website and search on international programs. And as many of you know, lots of products that are available for free, software for analysis, software for design, a capabilities checklist for a nation to see do they have the sort of the pieces to put together, so on and so forth. And more of these are coming, and our goal is not only to improve them, but to help improve not only our own statistical system, but help with other nations and have a two-way street on that. We work in a lot of places around the world, and the shading has to do, the dark shading, with relatively recent activities, the lighter with relatively longer ago. And we have absolutely no international programs in the United States, as you can see, because I guess we claim that as domestic and not international. And the director has wanted me to make sure to put this last thing on this slide, and that is we really are interested in more collaboration, interaction, learning from each other, two-way streeting, and so on. We feel, and I feel even more strongly now after yesterday, and we'll see for the rest of today the same, that GCC Stat and other places are just equally good at teaching us as we are them. It's a very symmetric world in my view. We have lots of ways that we're broadening our research capacity. The top line has to do with some fellowship and other kinds of programs. We have research data networks where people can be sworn to be keeping identities private and therefore have access to the full microdata. These are located at universities in secure physical space, but it's very much just like being within the Census Bureau in terms of having access, and we're expanding those. In fact, at Penn State, one opened on Monday and Tuesday. We have 8 grantees that are working on survey-related research at 8 academic institutions, and the idea there is not only to generate new knowledge, but to develop young faculty and graduate students not only to know about survey issues and processes, but to, in fact, hopefully recruit the next cadre of people that are interested in this field and help build it. So the last thing is that Paul asked us to prognosticate. And Science Magazine every 10 years has an issue on predictions for the next 10 years. And I still remember in the 1980 issue that comment at the top that prediction is a very delicate art, especially with regard to the future. And it is. The top line of this slide also makes hopefully clear that what I have on this slide and the next one are my own views, not necessarily those of the US Census Bureau, but who knows, they might be. And the pessimistic side is that there may be replacement of much of agency information by big data and by other things. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that the first bullet on the optimistic side is exactly the same. It's both optimistic and pessimistic, and we have to make sure to turn it into the optimistic side. At least within the United States, response rates are going down by individuals at least, and we have to figure out some way to increase them or to replace them by other technologies. The last bullet is really very similar, but a little bit different, and that is, as you all know, it doesn't take much to completely eliminate trust in, let's say in my case, the federal statistical system or the Census Bureau, and it takes a very long time to build trust back up. And so we have to be very careful to make sure to do as best we can on protect identities and to be considered and to be a respected, reliable source. The optimism is indeed that things like asking people when they leave for work, we can probably replace by cell phone tracking and other things, not of that individual, it's not that we care about, but geo-linked, spatially and temporally linked data. There are just a wide variety of new data sources that can't help but help, in that the worst you could do is ignore them, but the best you can do is build them into the system and have them be useful wherever they are. There certainly is increased cooperation and harmonization amongst nations, and I think that should continue. And my last point is that we need to control our future and really to focus on the optimistic side, not to ignore the pessimistic side, but to spend our energy not whining, but in fact getting on with it and making sure the future is bright. And so my officially sanctioned last slide is the thank you one, and thank you.
Okay, that was excellent, Tom. Our next speaker is Enrique from Mexico. Enrique, are you ready? Yep, okay.
First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting INEGI to share with you our experiences. I also have regards from Dr. Soho, the president of INEGI, who was not able to be here, and I will be representing him. I will be talking on how we got to be what we are now. INEGI has been in existence officially for 30 years, but in the last 5 years or so, we have been granted, and I'll skip some of the slides also, we have been granted autonomy. In 2006, there was a constitutional amendment to Article 26, which was published in our official Journal of the Federation, which indicates that the Mexican state, will have a national system of statistical and geographical information, which will have the responsibility for regulating and coordinating the system, and will be in charge, and this will be in charge of an agency with technical autonomy and management. This is something that has been very relevant for us. Before this, INEGI depended on the finance minister, and so in a sense we were subject, or INEGI was subject to their decisions. With autonomy, Congress approves our budget, and from then on, we, according to our regulations and so on, but we decide what we do, when we do it, and so on. In 2000, the law was approved in 2006, and it was only until 2008 that the entity started functioning as such. In October 13, 2008, the governing board was formally installed. The governing board is formed of 5 people, the president and 4 vice presidents. I'm one of the vice presidents. And the law states that the National System of Statistical and Geographical Information has 2 main parts. It is coordinated by this entity called INEGI, National Institute of Geography and Statistics. We have geography and statistics together. And as such, we coordinate the system and we also produce statistics. In terms of coordination, the whole system includes or is divided into 4 subsystems. And there are also what are called special technical committees, which are the ones that carry out the work of coordinating the generation of information in each one of different topics. The whole system is divided, as I said, into 4 for the purpose of coordination. One is the subsystem of demographic and social statistics. Another is the subsystem of economic statistics. The other is the subsystem of geographical and environmental information. It should probably say geospatial now. And the 4th is the subsystem of government, public security, and justice. Each subsystem is coordinated by an executive committee presided by one of the vice presidents. And one of the main things that the system does as such is to provide standards that are to be followed by all the agencies producing statistics. INEGI does not produce all the statistics or geospatial data for that matter. In terms of geospatial, we produce most of it. In terms of statistics, many other agencies produce them, so we need these standards in order to follow the same methods to have consistent information. As an example, or a couple of examples, we have the North American Industrial Classification System, which is developed jointly with the US and Canada, and all our information, our activities are classified according to this system. It applies in full in projects that make up the national interest information, the information coordinated by the system. And within the institute, all economic surveys are using it, and also the census, economic census, the national accounts, pricing, price indexes, and in addition, other agencies in Mexico officially must use it, and many are moving in that direction rather quickly. Like the SAT there is the Office of Revenue, Tax Revenue. The CFE is the National Electric Power Entity, which provides electricity. It's the only provider of electricity, so they have good information on the users of electricity, and they are using or have begun to use this classification system. Also, the National Security Institute, the IMSS shown there, is using this. This allows the crossing or comparison of information between entities and using it for, simultaneously. Another example is what we call the geographical addresses norm. It sets the rules for writing an address. As you must know and experience, each entity, a bank, a telephone company, the lighting company, and so on, everybody uses their own way of writing addresses. Some may write the names with abbreviations or initials, others don't. The same goes for the streets. Some use the number before or after. And this norm establishes one way of doing it, and it is mandatory to use it. So this allows us to compare, to integrate information from different sources if they are using the same address format. And it has been really very helpful. It's not completely done yet, but we're working on it. And in terms of, that was a very brief overview of what we do in terms of coordination. We set standards, we set rules, and in terms of producing information, like Paul said, we are one of the few institutes that integrates statistics and geographic geospatial information. We have both under the same roof in the same institution, and it really helps integrate the information. I will try to show you some of the examples that result from this. It doesn't mean you cannot do them if they're not together, but it facilitates many things. In terms of statistical information, we have many of the traditional programs. We have census projects. The Mexican law states that only INEGI can carry out censuses of any kind. No other entity can carry them out. And we have the census, population census, the economic census. One is for population, the other is for businesses. That is being carried out right now. And we also have many surveys. We have surveys in households. Eventually, we should move away from surveys. We have about 38 that are carried out regularly. Some are annual, some are biannual, and so on. Some examples, the employment survey, the National Survey of Occupation and Employment. That's the one that we use to get our unemployment figures on consumer confidence. The National Household of Income and Expenditures, that's the one we use to estimate family income and expenditures and to get the weights for the price index, the weights for the different kind of consumer goods. Then we have some other special surveys. There's the list there. I'm not going to mention them all, but there's some on use of time in the households and medical insurance and so on. And many include what we call modules. So for example, in the household income and expenditure survey, we can add a module for a very specific topic that will be applied, say, only once. We cannot add too many because, as you know, as the questionnaire expands, it lowers the rate of response and so on. But we do include some, and like I said, some are applied once and some are applied regularly. On the side of establishments, economic establishments, we also have several surveys, a monthly industrial survey, monthly survey of businesses, services, and so on. And the national surveys are done annually, and they are more specific, I would say. Again, you can see what they are. I will not go into the detail, but these are usually very large sample sizes. I mean, some are 70,000, 30,000, depending on the precision required. Also, we are moving, as it has already been mentioned and should be carried out more every time, towards the use of administrative records. We have been moving slowly here because of the difficulty of getting the information to be compatible with other things we do, but some information relies completely on that, like vital statistics on mortality, marriage, and so on. Some of the economic statistics, like Mexico's foreign trade, relies on the import and export records, and like also state and local public finance, those rely on the records of state finances, and also the social statistics, like suicide attempts and suicides, that comes from public records, and so on. So we are combining administrative records with surveys, censuses, and in terms of derived statistics, we produce the national accounts, the system of national accounts, which I will not go into. We are also responsible for producing consumer and producer price indices. We do this since 2011. Before that, the central bank was responsible for producing the price index, but they are responsible for monetary policy and so on. So they were judge in part. So now INEGI is responsible for producing the national consumer price index. And to do this, we go to 46 cities, the main cities, and carry out surveys, price surveys in very specific locations, and we provide certain services based on this. By law, we have to publish the price index. We have to use certain formulas that's stated in the law, because the price index is the basis for many negotiations, contracts, and so on. So it has to be very clearly specified. But in addition to that, we also provide different analysis tools, like some have already been mentioned, like Gapminder or the bubble graphs, and we also have an inflation calculator. If you are uncertain about what your true inflation is, you can, if you don't want to rely on the government's figure, you can go to our web page and figure out, either for your sector or for your company or for your own personal finances, and use your own weights for the different products and find your own inflation. And you can also represent it on maps. And you can also go and online query consumer price index, and you will find published the prices of the detailed prices of many of the products by cities, by kind of product. This, I believe, you probably can't see it, I can't see it, but it's for shoes, and you can see the different brands of shoes in each city, so that you can, if you wanted to construct a particular price index also. And we have to be careful, like it has already been mentioned, not to provide the price coming from a very specific store. It's from cities. So these are average prices by city. And like I said, these are available online. And also from the geospatial point of view, again, we have different inputs, the usual inputs I would say, and we have free, available to the public, geostatistical viewers, where people can go into the web page and have access to different maps and different views, forms of viewing the information. And but we produce okay, and so we have the some of the products. They are, I guess, fairly standard. And the thing I want to show, because I need to finish, is how we present this information. And this is a video, and it shows for economic businesses, you can go in and request like pharmacies here, and you can say we want pharmacies with or without convenience stores, for example, and you can ask for the size of the businesses, and then you can go to a specific geographic area. We go here to the state of Guanajuato, and then you find the city you want, and the city of León, and you can ask to quantify, and you find that there are that many pharmacies with or without a convenience store, and also then you can locate them on the map. You can see where they are, all the pharmacies, and then you can go to a very specific one that if you're interested in, and you can see its information, the one they provide, and also then you can see the street view if you want. And this is for all the businesses. This is called the National Directory. There's the street view. And we have 4.7 million businesses of all kinds, and we are currently working on the economic census, which will update this. On the household side, we have what is called the National Inventory of Households. And again, if you go in, you can go to any city, you can request or provide the name of the city, and then it'll take you there, and then you can request. There are 194 variables that are obtained from the census, population census, that are presented by blocks, by city blocks. And in each one, you can see how many households, how many privately owned households, how many with electric power, with electricity, and so on. And this is available for 29, 30 million households, all grouped by city blocks. And you can see many more characteristics from the environment, from the city, or from the households. And these are two examples, and this is the last one, of how we present the information, the statistical information we have, combined with the geospatial aspects of it. And there are many more, but these are two of the more important ones. You can view them with Google also, and they're both presented in the Mexican geospatial, I forgot the name, the map of Mexico, digital map of Mexico, and we use this for all our geospatial references, and the other agencies use this also for their information, so we can compare and overlay many of the information available. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you. Sorry for rushing you a little bit, but I thought the last two slides is a good example of how do you integrate statistical information with maps. And when I first saw it, I was very impressed. And, you know, it's really amazing way of handling the information. So the next speaker is Dr. Vanessa Lawrence. Vanessa, please. Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And if I also may offer my thanks for the huge honor that you've afforded both myself and all my international colleagues by inviting us to join you at such an important event. And one that, if I look back in Europe, the important work that Eurostat does, and to think you've kindly invited us at the very beginning of GCC Stat, is something I'm sure many of us will never forget. So over the next 15 minutes, I would like to give you a short overview of how, in my opinion, what we're seeing is authoritative place-based data. We can call it mapping data. We can call it geospatial data. And I was talking to a couple of people yesterday, and they were not familiar with the term geospatial. And so we had quite a chat about what should you call it. And I work a lot with politicians, both in my own country and around the world. And I've learned that actually the language that we often use actually is not something that people fully understand. So very much from my point of view, you can replace the words geospatial, geographical information with place-based and location. So please don't feel that us sort of in the mapping world are inaccessible. We're just very bad at using plain old English language. So what I'm hoping is that this will give you a little bit of an insight into how I think it is assisting innovation in the interpretation of statistics. Something that's very important to think about is that everything happens somewhere. And it's clearly been shown by many independent results that well over 95% of all information that is stored has got a location related to it. And so, as a result, that is why that information can absolutely make a difference the moment you start to interpret it with authoritative location-based data. It brings it to life, whether it be a crisis where the geography is changing, perhaps even every minute, or whether it is something that is more static, like our underground utilities. And what we can see is, depending on the resolution, the more information, the more understanding you can get from that information. Because very much when we think about measuring and monitoring, examples being sustainable development, you do need location or geography and statistics working together. And what I often find is there's a little bit of confusion about the role of the mapping and location information and the role of the statistical information. And it is about making sure they're integrated. Now, I'm absolutely conscious I'm speaking to a room of experts in statistics. So the one thing I'm not going to try to be is an expert in statistics, because from my point of view, what I am is hopefully an expert in location-placed data. And what I know is around the world, absolutely, it's about making sure that when you're using geospatial data, you are getting that data from the authoritative source. And so, as a result, certainly in my own country and in many countries I advise, what I see is that often people think, I can only be the only organization holding that geospatial data, because it's so important to me. And even 20 years ago in Britain, that was how it was viewed. And it was my organization, which is Britain's National Mapping Authority, that thought they should own everybody's data. But what we've learnt is that that is the wrong way to do things. It's about working out who is the custodian of that absolutely authoritative stream of data, and making sure that with good standards, things are interoperable between each other. So in this diagram, for instance, the topographic information might come from the National Mapping Authority, but the utility information will come from the utility experts, the transport networks will come from the Department for Transport, and what you'll see is the environmental coming from the environmental organizations. And by using that authoritative information, you can put it then together with the authoritative information from statistics to really give a good example. What's interesting, here's an example from Australia, from the floods that happened in 2010. That's a picture of Queensland. And at the very beginning, it was considered that the mapping for the flooding should be done at administrative area. Well, that's the resulting map. Unfortunately, it looks as if at least 3/4 of Australia is actually underwater, which was not the case. But if you use the wrong kind of underlying geography, you end up with the wrong result. Now, it happens that there was a cyclone. Cyclone Yazzie came through on the 2nd and 3rd of February 2011. I was actually there. And absolutely, one of the pieces of advice I gave was we really needed to get down to the underlying authoritative geography to understand what was happening to each and every household, because that is what is affected, is people on the ground rather than generalization. And it matters to people to have it understood by governments what is happening to them at a time of stress. What we saw in that example was the institutional arrangements that were in place between different bureaus absolutely were then able to share their information absolutely in near real time to ensure that you got the highest resolution analysis and integration, and then you were able to give better targeted integrated decisions and interventions. By having that location framework in place where everybody is the authority on their data, this made a huge difference. And everyone knew that it was as maintained as the best of the best, which is also important. Turning to my own country, and those from our colleagues from Oman will perhaps recognize this geography because it is the geography of your embassy in London, in Queen's Gate. And what you're seeing there is what looks like a picture. But it's not actually. It's the world's largest geospatial database. It's basically every feature on the landscape in Great Britain, that's about 460 million features, are stored within it. And the feature fully understands what it is, it understands its history, it understands also what it does. And we've built this as the highest resolution data in Great Britain in order for people to be able to do their work. But going back, and people might recognize this, this is very close to our Parliament, and there is Westminster Abbey, where many of our royal occasions occur. But one of the things that's important is for my organization to understand which layers of information does it have responsibility for. And in our case, it's the topography, and we make 10,000 changes to the master map of Great Britain, the topographic layer, every day. 10,000 changes every day. We have an address layer, and we check 50,000 addresses on the ground every month. We have an integrated transport network layer with road restriction information and an imagery layer. But then there are many other parts of the British government, like our health service. They have their own layers. Our statistical office, ONS, has their own layers. And each and every one is coincident because we all use the Open Geospatial Consortium standards, the OGC standards around the world. Because one of the key things about all of this is how can you link data? And here you will see that every feature on the landscape within the master map has got a unique 16-digit code. And so as a result, you're seeing there's a highways database which says in that particular road of Chester Close, there is no lighting. And then there's a crime report showing there's been a vehicle break-in. And by integrating that information, people are able to get a better understanding of what's going on. But as I said, absolutely, it's about making sure everybody can link their information that they own to the same geography. And what we have here in Britain is been designed as something called the Digital National Framework. And the Digital National Framework is used by everybody to connect their information by using good open standards. And as a result, you end up with the master map with other people's information on. This is the utility information, the water information, and the drainage information added to it. But in fact, for Ordnance Survey, my job is only to maintain the geography. And here is a very good example that I work on day in, day out at the moment. We have something called the Commonwealth Games, which is a very large event coming up this summer where there'll be 27 nations coming from around the world. The standard geography is the master map, but all the other data is supplied by everybody else who is the authority on where are the spectator facilities, where are the tourist information. We're not the authority on that, there are other people. And it's about making sure that all the data is both authoritative and synchronized. And even the utilities have worked to ensure their part of this, and the Institution of Civil Engineers in London has recommended that all buried services in Great Britain are captured to DNF standards and principles. Why would one do this? Because it saves money. It gives economic benefit to nations. Here's an example of a utility company in Britain, and basically they believe they're supplying all of the pipes, all of the properties with the blue pipes connected to it. The billing department believe they're billing those in green, leaving those in red to have free utilities. And what does it do? This is for a very small regional utility. So if you then think of the whole value across the whole of Great Britain, this company, Northumbrian Water, just by doing that very simple analysis, they put their own billing data, their own supply data on top of the authoritative mapping, and they saved, in the first year alone, 640,000 Omani Rial. And they also cut their average cost per year by 38,000. So really making a difference. And this system is used throughout the whole of the public sector. There are unbelievably 3,340 public sector organizations in Great Britain, including the health services, and 3,194 of them use geography in their day-to-day work every day. And so here you've got rubbish collection, something that happens around the world. And here, in a very small area, they said they were able to optimize their routing, reducing their diesel costs by 12%, increasing their spare capacity by 14%. And then school transport, that goes on all around the world. And this, again, a small council, and if you then, there are 436 councils in Britain, so this is just one, and they were able to save 103,000 Omani Rial. What we see is people putting this data together to get better information. And something I've had to spend the last 2 months working on, we've had acute flooding in Great Britain. And the Prime Minister has been very clear that he's leading on flooding, and I was told I was leading on the mapping. So my responsibility has been making sure that all the information can be brought together in a way that our Prime Minister wishes to see it. And that has involved a vast amount of things like the government put through new planning regulations to make sure that all houses were flood resistant from 2008. So he wanted to know the exact number of houses that had been built since 2008 that had flooded, because it showed that the builders had not followed the regulations. And it's those kind of things that make an economic difference. All of this kind of having standards, making sure people work together, are brought together in Britain in a particular strategy called Place Matters. And there are some copies here if people would like them. But it's about saying, we know what data we have, we know who's the authority for collecting it, and we avoid duplicating it. We use common reference data. We share that information, and we only collect it once across the whole of the government. So we do not have the education department, the transport department, the statistical department, all collecting the same things. They are just authorities of their data, but they all interlink, and they share that data. And we have the appropriate skills, and of course, we need leadership, as always, in these things. And around the world, there are many other good examples. In Brazil, they have done a similar kind of investment in the state of Amazonias, and what we've seen is they've been able to say there's been a 10% reduction in police incidents and a 13% reduction in murders between May 2011 and May 2012. In Korea, they absolutely reflecting their geography, doing very similar things with 3D geography, but again making sure everybody understands there's one authority for each data set within the government. And so I now come to something that Paul has been really the father, the godfather, the absolute stimulus to. Because Paul, as he mentioned in his introduction, has led an initiative for which my own industry is massively grateful, because he recognized that geographic information globally was not as organized as you are in statistics. And so as a result, he was the instigator for setting up something called the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, for which I'm fortunate enough to be one of the co-chairs, and my colleague from Mexico is representing today Dr. Soho, and Dr. Soho is the other co-chair at the moment. And even from the beginning, when it started in 2011, Paul had managed to get enough energy behind it to really start to get a lot of nations interested in it. Because what it did was, for the first time, bring the geospatial teams together, absolutely with the foreign offices completely understanding the importance of geography, just like they've always understood the importance of statistics, to nation building. And absolutely clear that this data needed to be trusted, maintained, and invested in by governments. And so this coordinating body absolutely is all about involving member states around the world. Now, since Paul started it, absolutely it has just taken off, and for that we have to very much thank his leadership and that of Stefan Sveinvest, who now you will know through the UN Statistics Division, and we know him as being the now replaced leader from Paul of UNGGIM. Because it was all about realizing that vision to make accurate, reliable, and authoritative geospatial information readily available to support national, regional, and global development. Because, as I've shown, it transforms nations, it takes cost out of activities, and it gives the citizens a better benefit. And what we've seen is that there was at a time that lack of leadership, and then there was confusion about, was the private sector leading on this, or was the public sector leading on this? Well, there are certain things that absolutely the private sector can do. The private sector does a great job of being contractors to the authority who's creating the data. But for the private sector to be the authority is not the way forward for governments. And because the government has that mandate. And so we are now approaching UNGGIM 4, which is now to be held in New York this August. And at UNGGIM 3, what we saw was about 120 nations now absolutely engaged at senior ministerial level in this important initiative. Because we're discussing important issues about getting best practice across the world, about assuring quality, about ensuring promoting data sharing, and making sure that people understand how to partner. Probably all the same issues that in statistics you are grappling with. But one of the documents that really has made a difference, and I understand from colleagues that has been presented now to over 50 cabinets around the world since last August when it was launched, and we have a few copies here if you'd care to have it, is a document called Future Trends in Geospatial Information Management, the 5 to 10 year vision. This is written not for technical people, but for policy experts and our senior stakeholders in our organizations. I'm delighted to say that it's available in many languages now, and the Arabic version, we must thank our colleagues from Bahrain and Qatar, is just being finished at the moment. But what's in it? Basically, there were 5 key themes. One about trends in technology and the future direction of data creation, maintenance, and management, legal and policy developments, skills requirements and training mechanisms, the role of the private sector and non-governmental sector, and the future roles of government in data provision and management. And much of the things are things that when you have them brought together, you realize, oh, I understand the relationship between this and my particular subject. What we're seeing is, of course, all of us with our smartphones becoming geospatial beacons all the time. And it's about making sure we understand how to manage that data, that big data our colleagues have talked about. And what we're seeing is when you've got 2.5 quintillion bytes created every day, how are we going to manage that better? The demand for real-time information all the time. The world is now so hyper-connected. It's about making sure that absolutely we understand the new ways of linking that data. There are some fantastic initiatives being brought out, of which my own organization is involved, by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is the founder of the original World Wide Web. And Sir Tim believes putting geographical work with the web as linked data will make a difference to organizing the world's information. Making sure people understand cloud computing and understanding the role of open source. What we're seeing is open source absolutely rising from being used occasionally to now becoming the norm, certainly in the British government. The British government has been very clear that they are keen that at all procurements, open source software is looked at very seriously. Because resources are constrained, they want to be able to modify and share easily, and what we're seeing is future geospatial leaders exposed to it as children, really. The trend from 2D mapping into 3D mapping, and now into 4D with time, and what I'm also seeing, people starting to talk about 5D mapping. What we're also seeing is the use of UAVs, and how can they collect data? Not in any military way, that's not what this is about. I use a UAV to basically keep some of my staff safe. When they need to go near an electrified railway line to survey it, we survey to 1 centimeter accuracy on the ground. I don't want them tripping anywhere near that line. They will die instantly if they touch it. So they launch a UAV absolutely to get their accuracy of line of sight. So they're used for safety, not for things that people talk about being clandestine and horrible. Hold on. What's happened now? Oh, there. Also, satellite imagery. That is changing. We also are seeing so many new entrants into the satellite world, small satellites. There are companies in America who have launched in the location world 28 satellites in 1 month, and they believe it's going to make a difference over mapping of Africa. What's that going to do to our industry? All of those changes are happening. And what we're seeing is interoperability, very key. There are legal and policy developments, and the UN has taken this very seriously, because the International Bar Association has taken an interest now in our industry. That is good, maybe, or maybe not, because the International Bar Association runs the legal profession in most countries. So the UN GGIM has been working with the International Bar Association for them to understand some of the issues and to ensure that they don't try to regulate what we can fly over and what we can't fly over. There's skills and training requirements. There's information on the role of the private and non-governmental sectors and of what is government and how is government going to work together going forward. What's nice about this document, though, it wasn't written by one person. It was contributed to by over 100 people. It was their collective views. It's certainly not the views of any single one individual. And it was then ratified by the member states on 2 occasions, and hence was published. Because, just to finish, end users should be able to consume this data absolutely with the level of trust in its quality as they get water or clean water from a tap. They need to know what they're going to expect. And what we've seen is a lot of interest at the highest levels of leadership to these kind of things. And what we've seen is at the Rio +20 summit, we were very lucky that we were given slots to speak. And in the outcome document, we saw people taking an interest in reliable geospatial information. And in the main speeches, here was my own Deputy Prime Minister talking about the importance of reliable, trusted geographic information. Absolutely very, very important to being able to do that important statistical work. So in the UN GGIM, as Paul mentioned right at the start, in the 3rd session in July 2013, we adopted the decision which acknowledged the critical importance of integrating geospatial information with statistics, and we started an expert group which my colleagues from Mexico are leading upon and doing an outstanding job. And for those who would like to know, there is a 2-day workshop ahead of the formal meeting of UN GGIM to focus on the integration of statistics with geospatial this coming August. Because what's very clear is the amount of interest in this, but also the amount of interest in making sure that everybody uses worldwide standards, and in their own countries, they work out who should be in charge of each layer of information to ensure they have authoritative information. And just to finish, there you can see the cabinet of the United Kingdom government meeting during the floods, discussing absolutely what we've talked about, the integration of geospatial information that's accurate and relied upon with the statistics that made sure that the Prime Minister could do his work and make his own decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa, for the interesting presentation, and thank you for your kind words. I think I looked younger at the time. Now I've aged. So we have one more speaker, and this is, of course, the very important person, the board member of the GCC STAD, Dr. Mohammed Al-Amr, and also the president of the Central Informatic Organization, Bahrain. Now, we started this session 15 minutes late. So I hope that after this presentation, we still have a few minutes to take some questions, but there is a bit of a time pressure. But we should not put the time pressure on Dr. Al-Amr. You should take as much time as you can to present your story. Dr. Al-Amr, please. Yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب السعادة، أعضاء رئيس وأعضاء مجلس أمناء المركز الوطني الخليجي الإحصائي. ودي بس لأني أول مرة أتحدث في هذه الندوة، ودي بس أعبر عن بعض الكلمات الرسائل. ودي أشكر وأهني الأخ صابر، وطبعا أهنيكم أولا للحفل الرائع، كان قاية الروعة، وبالفعل يعني أحسسنا كأنه يعني بداية ممتازة للعمل. أيضا ودي بعد أعبر عن يعني شكري وتقديري للأخوة في السلطنة اللي على حسن الضيافة وحسن التنظيم كذلك وكرم الضيافة، وحسسونا كأننا طبعا في بلدنا البحرين. والمركز الوطني برئاسة الأخ صابر، وكذلك أيضا منتسبي، والمركز الوطني الإحصائي كذلك، لأنهم دعموا الندوة ودعموا الافتتاح، فلهم جزيل الشكر كذلك ولمنتسبيهم. طبعا أنا أعرف واعي تماما أن أنا العائق الوحيد بينكم وبين الغداء، فأحاول أتم العملية بسرعة. هذه الشريحة تتحدث عن تطور الجهاز، بس ودي أتوقف عند المحطات الأخضر اللي ملونة باللون الأخضر. أولاً اللي هو التعداد، فالتعداد في البحرين بدأ في 1941، طبعاً يعني يعتبر من أوائل التعدادات في المنطقة، وانتقل إلى التحول من إحصاء تعداد إحصاء إلى جهاز مركزي للمعلومات لما تغير اسمه إلى الجهاز المركزي للمعلومات. يعني نظرتنا ذيك الفترة لأهمية المعلومات، ولو الإحصاء جانب من المعلومات اللي ممكن تخدم الحكومات. في 2010 كان أول تعداد سجلي، هو الأول تعداد أجري بالكامل بدون النزول للميدان، وبالتالي تحقق ما كنا نطمح له منذ 1984 إلى ذاك الوقت. يعني السجل السكاني كان هو طبعا النواة لخلق هذا التعداد، ولما وصلنا إلى مرحلة من الاستقرار بدأنا نستخرج من المعلومات مباشرة، وبالتالي ما كان في داعي أن نجري تعداد ميداني. رؤية الجهاز تنبع من، ولاحظوا على فكرة بس للمتحدثين باللغة الإنجليزية، حاولت أني أترجم العناوين الرئيسية للشرائح حتى تكون مفهومة أكثر. رؤية الجهاز نبعت من أقوال وجلالة الملك وتطلعاته دائما، أن لما يقول أن هدف الإصلاح هو تقديم خدمات رفاهية للمواطن، وذلك بأن يقوم الجهاز التنفيذي بدوره كاملا على أساس منهجية وعلمية وعالمية. فالمواطن هو يعني نواة أو مركز اهتمام أي هدف للإصلاح. كذلك رؤية البحرين الاقتصادية 2030 تتحدث أيضا عن المواطن، وأن سوف تعتمد كل مجتمعاتنا وحكومتنا على مبادئ معينة اللي هي الاستدامة والتنافسية والعدالة لكي تتهيأ لكل مواطن بحريني السبل التي تمكنه من تجسيد قدراته الكاملة وعيش حياة كريمة وآمنة. برنامج عمل الحكومة اللي هو الاستراتيجية الرباعية كل 4 سنوات أيضا ذكرت أن وضع المشاريع والبرامج التنموية والمبادرات الاستراتيجية بما يحقق التوازن بين الأهداف الطويلة الأجل والموارد لتحقيق الأهداف ويضمن مصالح جميع المواطنين. من كل هذه الرؤى ومن كل هذه التطلعات تنبع رؤية الجهاز، وهي تحقيق أعلى مستوى معيشي للمواطنين من خلال توفير معلومات وخدمات شاملة ومؤمنة ودقيقة في الوقت المناسب. فمهم للمعلومة حتى يكون القرار مناسب توفيراً للوقت وتحقيقاً لأكبر فائدة من هذا القرار، أن تكون المعلومة أول شيء أن تكون شاملة، لا تكون ناقص، إذا المعلومة الناقصة توديك إلى طريق الخطأ، وتكون أيضاً كذلك مؤمنة سكيور ودقيقة، لابد تكون صحيحة كذلك وفي وقتها المناسب، لأن المعلومات إذا تأخرت فبيكون القرار ما بيكون صحيح لأنه مبني على معلومات قديمة جدا. قبل لا أسترسل أيضا في شرح يعني توجهنا كأبروتش حق في الجهاز المركزي للمعلومات، ودي بس نتفق على تعريفات معينة أنا وأنتو حتى ممكن ننتقل إلى السلايدات القادمة. في هناك 3 مستويات للمعلومات، هي البيانات في المرحلة الأولى والمعلومات والمعرفة. البيانات هي الحقائق الأولية أو المواد الخام غير مترابطة من الناحية الموضوعية، يعني وعادة تتكلم عن حالة وواقعة، أو بالأحرى يعني لما نقول والله الشخص أعزب فهذه حالة، لما نقول تزوج فهي واقعة زواج، فتسجل فيها واقعات حتى تتغير فيها الحالات البيانات، هذه ما تسمى البيانات. توصل إلى مرحلة أعلى اللي هي المعلومات. المعلومات عبارة عن بيانات ولكنها تمت معالجتها وربطها واستخراج منها جداول أو أشياء منها أو رسوم بيانية، فهذه تعتبر معلومات. فالإحصاء تقريبا كنتيجة من الإحصاء يعني تصب في هذه الموضوع اللي هي المعلومات. المعرفة اللي هي مرحلة أعلى من في مستوى، اللي هي حصيلة الامتزاج بين المعلومة والخبرة والمدركات الحسية والقدرة على الحكم عن طريق وسيط تدخل الإنسان. لما نربط معلومة مع معلومة أخرى نستنتج معرفة. يعني إذا بعطيكم بعض الأمثلة، البيانات مثل ما قلنا الزواج والخاصة بالفرد، بيانات الشخصية على سبيل المثال، يعني في بيانات خاصة بالشركات، في بيانات خاصة بنظم المعلومات الجغرافية وكذلك. المعلومات لما نربطها، لما نقول والله عدد السكان حسب السنة وحسب المناطق، هذه تعتبر بيانات أو إحصاءات. المعرفة لما نربط معلومة من قطاع مع معلومة من قطاع آخر، يعني على سبيل المثال لما نقول مثلا نربط وفيات، إحصائيات الوفيات للأطفال مع يعني التعليم الوالدين أو مدى تأهيلهم، فلما نربط معلومات التعليم مع الصحة نصل إلى معرفة ممكن تتحقق نضع منها السياسات. فإذا اتفقنا على هذه التعاريف أعتقد يعني يمكن نختلف في بعضها، بس إذا يعني قبلوها مني حتى ننتقل إلى المرحلة القادمة. الجهاز إذا ننظر في الجانب الأخير في الزاوية فوق، هذه هو الجهاز، عبارة عن مصنع. الجهاز المركزي للمعلومات في مملكة البحرين شوية يختلف عن بقية الأجهزة الموجودة في مجلس التعاون وحتى في دول العالم. يمكن حجم البحرين يسهل علينا تنفيذه، لكن أعتقد أنه ساعدنا كثير في الانتقال من مرحلة إلى أخرى. الجهاز ينقسم إلى الإحصاء، فعندنا إدارة عامة للإحصاء، وعندنا إدارة عامة للإحصاء للسجل السكاني، اللي هي أيضا تصدر بطاقات الهوية اللي تستخدم في تعريف الأشخاص، وأيضا الانتقال بين البحرين وبقية دول مجلس التعاون. وأيضا عندنا نظم المعلومات الجغرافية، فإحنا الجهة المسؤولة أيضا عن نظم الجايس، نظم المعلومات الجغرافية وتقنية المعلومات. إحنا أيضا الجهة المعنية بالاي تي وتقنية المعلومات في الدولة، فإحنا مسؤولين عن كديتا سنتر، تنفيذ تطوير بعض الأنظمة لبعض الوزارات وهلم جرى. يعني هي متشعبة لكنها في الأخير تخدم أهدافنا وتخدم رؤيتنا في تحقيق ما نطمح له. الجهاز يجمع معلومات تجي مثل الرو ديتا، المواد الخام. المواطن يمر بمرحلة يعني حياة أو دورة الحياة للمواطن، من ميلاد ثم تعليم ثم عمل ثم زواج ثم سكن، صحته كذلك. كل هذه تخلق لنا معلومات كثيرة وتجمع من الوزارات وتجمع في حدوثها في وقتها في آنها. أيضا تفاعل المواطن مع البيئة والطبيعة كذلك. يعني احنا ما نتكلم بس عن المعلومات الخاصة بالبشر وإنما أيضا تفاعلها مع الموارد الطبيعية، بترول، نفط، يعني الأرض، تعاملها في إنشاء مثلا مؤسسات وعملية تجارية. فهناك تفاعل بين المواطن وبين البيئة اللي يعيش فيها، تصدر من بيانات تجمع وتدخل في هذا الجهاز اللي هو أنا أعتبره كأنه مصنع تكرير. المصنع التكرير يأخذ هذه المواد الخام، يعالجها ويطلع منها يعني منتجاتنا هي كما ترونها في الأسفل، هي بيانات مثل ما ذكرنا، ومعرفة ومعلومات ومعرفة. يعني صومعة البترول، صومعة التكرير عادة يكون اللي موجود في أسفل الصومعة هو الأقل يعني قيمة، مثل الأسفلت على سبيل المثال يكون أقل قيمة. لما توصل إلى مرحلة أعلى مثل البنزين يكون مرحلة قيمته أكثر. لما تصل إلى النفثة على سبيل المثال، يعني أتكلم لأني أنا مهندس بالأساس مو بإحصائي، فلما يكون في أعلى الصومعة هو النفثة اللي هو قيمته أعلى وحجم أقل. فبنفس الطريقة في المعلومات، أنت لما تأخذ البيانات وتدققها وتستخرج منها شيء، فالبيانات هي الأساس، وبعدين المعلومة تجي في مرحلة ثانية في القيمة، تزيد القيمة لما تحولها إلى معرفة. ويعني ما أخفي سر لما أقول إن إحنا يعني إذا يبين المدرج البيانات تلاقون يعني الأنبوبة مليانة، لأن إحنا أعتقد إن إحنا يعني قاعدين يعني ننفذ البيانات بصورة شاملة، لكن لازلنا في مرحلة المعلومات نتطور، وفي المعرفة في مجال كبير للتطور، لأن لازلنا في بدايات التحول إلى المعرفة. البيانات كل جزء، أنا واقف عند هذا الشريحة لأنه يعني طبعا الشريحة المفضلة عندي، تشرح تقريبا إجمالي البرزنتيشن، أخرى في الحكومة وأيضا في المعرفة، أقصد في الحكومة وأيضا في الوطن على وجه العموم. لا نستقف يعني لا نغفل عن جانب ونركز على جانب آخر، كل له مزاياه وكل له فائدته. البيانات فائدته في الخدمات، في الجانب يعني تخدم الموظفين الموجودين على تقديم الخدمات. لما الشخص يروح وزارة الإسكان وفي السابق مثلا ينظرون يطلبوا من عنده أوراق يثبت أنه متزوج، ينطبق عليه المعايير اللي هل يقبل طلبه أم لا، وبعدين يقرر. إذا أنا أقدر أوفر حق هذا الموظف أنه من يدخل رقمه الشخصي يقول له هل هذا يستحق أو لا، لأن عملية التدقيق تتم أوتوماتيكيا، هل هو متزوج، هل هو راتبه ما ينطبق عليه استحقاقه للخدمة الإسكانية وهل ما جرى، ويقول له مباشرة أن أنت تستحق أم لا. هذه أنا خدمت الحكومة فيها، لأن قدمت بيانات تخدم الموظفين في هذه الشريحة. المعلومات تخدم في شريحة أو في الأحرى المستوى الأعلى اللي هو التنفيذيين، المسؤولين عن إعداد الخطط التشغيلية. إذا يعرف مثلا هل كثر طالب أو بالأحرى يعني صغار سن في سن التمدرس بعد سنة أو بعد سنتين أو بعد 3 سنوات، وهو ممكن يخطط أنه يبني مدارس أو فصول على أساسها. فبالتالي أنا وفرت له معلومات على متى بيكون فيها مجال للشخص الصغار أن يدخلون في مرحلة التمدرس، المدرسة اللي ممكن يصمم ويخطط على ضوءها. المعرفة مهمة لأن هي الأهم، لأن هي مهمة لصانع القرار، مهمة للاستراتيجي، مهمة للبوليسي ميكرز في أي دولة. وعلى ضوءها تصدر منها مشاريع، تصدر منها مبادرات تغير في تحسن مستوى المعيشة للمواطن، وبالتالي تتغير في المعلومات اللي نستقيها من المواطن، وتستمر الدورة وهلم جرى في الوصول إلى الشيء الأفضل والتطور الأحسن. طبعا احنا مثل ما قلت يعني قادرين ان ننجز في الموضوع البيانات والمعلومات، لكن عندنا مشكلة في المعرفة، فكيف نخلقها؟ البيانات ما تحتاج إلى كثير من التدخل البشري، المعلومات يحتاج إحصائيين، يحتاج إلى مجموعة ممكن تستفيد من البيانات لتحويلها إلى معلومات، لكن تحويلها إلى معرفة يحتاج أيضا تخصص. يعني أنا ما أقدر أقول والله في جهاز معين يقدر يطلع بمعرفة، فلازم نوفرها للمتخصصين، هم يستفيدون منها ويخلقون منها معلومة، وبالتالي ممكن يوفرون حق البقية. لذلك عملنا الداتا بورتال والاوبن داتا. الداتا بورتال يعطي معلومات عن جميع البيانات الموجوده في البحرين، مو بالطريقه التقليديه اللي هي فيها قوالب معينه اللي ممكن الواحد ياخذ هالجدول ام لا، وانما مفتوح، ممكن يربط معلومات مع بعض البحث بالطريقه اللي يراها حتى يصل الى النتيجه اللي هو يستحقها. الاوبن داتا بالمقابل يعني احنا محاوله مزج بين دورنا كموفرين للبيانات والمعلومات وايضا التكنولوجيا الحديثه، مثل ما الموجود عندنا في الانستغرام والفيسبوك. الواحد ممكن يصور صوره ويحتفظ بها لنفسه، وممكن يصور صوره ويقول انا بتشارك مع مجموعه قريبه مني، او ان اصور صوره واسوي لها برودكاست حق الجميع يشوفها. الاوبن داتا نفس الطريقه، ان الواحد ممكن يدخل يشوف المعلومات ويحللها، لانه هو مختص في الهندسه او طبيب او كذا، يحلل المعلومات ويحتفظ بها لنفسه، او انه يقول لا ابغى اشترك مع مجموعه من الباحثين اللي لهم نفس الاهتمام فممكن يشترك معاهم، او انه يوفر حق الجميع. انا بهالمقابل باملي الخزان الخاص بالمعرفه باستخدام قدرات المتخصصين، مو بالقدرات الخاصه بالجهاز. فمع مرور وقت قصير بشوف ان هذا الخزان يملي بالمعرفه، لان صار في استفاده والكل شارك، والكل متعطش لهذه المعلومات والبيانات المفتوحه، حتى ممكن ايضا يساعد ويساهم بطريقته في بحوثه في التطور. بعض الانظمه اللي عملناها متخصصه اللي هي ديسيجن سبورت. في بعض يعني على سبيل المثال النائب الاول لسمو رئيس الوزراء اللي هو ولي العهد كذلك مهتم في موضوع المؤشرات، وبالتالي مهم بالنسبه له انه يشوف يعني مباشره الوضع العام في البحرين. فخلقنا له شيء على الايباد اللي ممكن يشوف الصوره العامه، المؤشرات الرئيسيه اللي هو يتابعها، اللي بلغنا انه هو يتابعها، وخلقنا له اياها في جدول يشوفها. فالاخضر معناته انه لا تحتاج الى اهتمام من عنده لان العمليه في تحسن، الاحمر في مجال للتحسين، ممكن يسوي دبل كليك على البوكس الاحمر ويدخل في التفاصيل اكثر حتى لين يصل الى لب الحقيقه، حتى ممكن ياخذ اجراء يساعد في تحسين هذه المؤشر. طبعا ساعدنا كثير مثل ما قلت انا ان احنا ايضا تقنيه المعلومات، عندنا شبكه المعلومات الحكوميه اللي توصل للوزارات كلها، اللي هي تساعد في تغذيتنا بالمعلومات وكذلك استفاده الوزارات من هذه المعلومات. عندنا تقريبا في 300 موقع تابع ل 50 جهه عمل في كشبكه معلومات الحكوميه، تساعدهم ايضا كذلك في الوصول الى الانترنت. نحميهم، يعني عندنا الداتا سنتر او المركز الحاسب الالي يستضيف تقريبا في حدود 600 موقع، في نظام الكتروني، في حمايه، ومستخدمين احدث التقنيات اللي نساعدهم في اعداد الخادم لاي جهه معينه. كان يعني يستغرق اذا كانت الوزاره تسويه في خلال شهرين، احنا ممكن نسويه في يومين، وبالاحرى حتى في عده ساعات الحين ممكن نسويها بدون تكلفه، لان احنا ممكن نستفيد من الكثره لان بطريقه الفيرتشواليزيشن. التعداد مثل ما ذكرت في 2010 اعتمدنا على التعداد السجلي، معلومات يعني استقيناها من السجلات حتى نصل الى النتائج المرجوه من التعداد، واعتقد هذه كان تم بنجاح، وهذا بيكون بالنسبه لنا يعني خلاص نهايه اي تعداد تقليدي الى التعدادات السجليه. في أنظمة كثيرة مثل ما قلت تستفيد من البيانات. عندنا نظام توجيه الدعم للمواطنين، على سبيل المثال لما الحكومة ارتأت أن تحتاج إلى نظام لتوجيه الدعم للمواطنين، ذكرت أنها محتاجة للنظام بأسرع ما يمكن، ممكن يصير لنا سويناه في شهر واحد على سبيل المثال، لأن عندنا القدرة كذلك في الاي تي ومطوري النظم اللي ممكن يقومون بهذا النظام. وزارة الإسكان يعني مثل ما قلنا في لما يستغرق النظام 20 دقيقة تحول إلى دقيقتين، عد الأوراق من 12 ورقة أو بالأحرى وثيقة يقدمها، يعني وثيقة زواج، وثيقة راتب كذا يقدمها قبل، الحين بدون ورق آلي ويستلم رقم الطلب مباشرة. فهذه خدمة من البيانات للحكومة حتى وللمواطن بالتحديد، لأنه يوفر عليه كثير من الجهد ويوفر على الحكومة أيضا كثير من الجهد. قاعدة المعلومات الجغرافية أو الجيوسبيشال أو الجي اي اس مثل ما ذكرت الأخت فانيسا، ايضا من ضمن الانظمه المستخدمه كثيرا، لان هي ايضا نظم معلومات. لما تنظر الى اي شريحه فهي نظام معلومات خاصه بالكهرباء او المياه او المجاري، فكلها تعتبر طبقات مع بعض. لكن لما يصير في اوفرلاي وتحط طبقه وراء طبقه حتى ممكن تشوفها كشريحه، هذه تتحول الى معرفه، لان انت ومثل ما يقول المثل العربي ان الصوره او بمثابه ال1000 كلمه. فانت لما تضع الشرائح مع بعض يكون ممكن تستنتج اشياء كثيره لما يدور حولك في خاص بالجيوسبيشال. طبعا في تقريبا في حوالي 250 شريحه موجوده حاليا تغطي تقريبا جميع الشرائح الموجوده في الوزارات. تحديث يومي للبيانات لأن جايز، فما تحتاج أن تتحدث مثلا بصورة آنية وإنما بصورة يومية. العرض يعني الريسبونس تايم تقريبا حدود 5 ثواني على غنى المعلومات الموجودة في الجي اس، إنما الريسبونس تايم أيضا جدا سريع. وعلى ضوءها ممكن تبني عليها فاليو ادد خدمات اللي هي خاصه. مثلا قد يكون وزاره الصحه على سبيل المثال ما تعنيها شيء في الجي اس كبنيه تحتيه، وانما عندها ايضا مراكز صحيه، عندها مستشفيات، تبي تعرف البروبرتيز مال كل الخصائص كل مركز وكل مستشفى وكل صيدليه. وبالتالي وزاره الصحه عندها نظام مبني على نظام الجي اس موجود. وزاره الاسكان كذلك يساعدهم في معرفه وزارة الإسكان يساعدهم في معرفة يعني الشقق الموجودة الخاصة بالإسكان ومدى إشغالها، حتى ممكن واحد بنظرة عامة للشقق الموجودة في البحرين ممكن يحدد أن هذه هناك في فراغ ممكن يشغله بشخص معين، بدل ما تكون ورقية ويطلعها على ورق. العملية أسهل بكثير. وكذلك في وزارات عدة ما ودي أتطرق لها الحين. في تفاصيل أكثر عندنا في الستاند الموجود برا في المعرض، ممكن يعطيكم بالتفاصيل أكثر. أيضا في خدمات خاصة بالجائز للمواطنين اللي ممكن عن طريق البحرين اكسبلورر، أو حتى حق الحكومة عندنا ما يسمى بالسبيشال ستريت فيديو في فيور. بعض الخدمات تحتاج إلى لما أصدر رخصة مطعم في وزارة الصحة يحتاج أنه يزور الموقع، نوفر عليه الوقت أن نعطيه صورة بالفيديو لهالمنطقة، فممكن يطلع عليها ويشوف ما يدور حواليه حتى يسمح له أنه يأخذ القرار المناسب. نظام تخليص تصاريح الطرق اللي هو الإي واي ليف، طريقة مهمة لجمع المعلومات بربطها بعملية يومية. كان في السابق لما أحد يبي يشق طريق حتى مثلا بنية تحتية، الكهرباء تبي تضع مثلا كيبل للكهرباء، تأخذ موافقات الجميع بطريقة يعني متسلسلة، ويستغرق تقريبا عدة أشهر، يعني 6 أشهر ممكن أقول، ويمر بجميع الوزارات الخدمية. حاليا في نظام آلي، الطلب يقدم مباشرة ونعطيهم 5 أيام إلى 10 أيام للرد حتى يتم الموافقة على الطلب. العملية تسرعت كثيرا، وبالتالي أيضا ساعدت في تحسين المعلومات، لأن خلاص المعلومة صارت جزء من الحياة اليومية للوزارات، وبالتالي معلوماتك أحدث ما يمكن. وهذه نهاية البرزنتيشن، شكرا لإصغائكم.
Thank you, Dr. Alma. Sorry to stop you because we are running a little bit out of time, but we have all these famous speakers, and they all, each of the topic could have taken an hour, but we're trying to condense it. And I think Dr. Alma had presented not too long ago in San Diego at the users conference. And so now maybe I can steal 10 minutes from the coffee break, and then may I invite the speakers to the stage, then maybe we can take some questions. Any questions from the floor? Or you want to prefer to have a coffee break? It's an opportunity to engage the international speakers who have different perspectives. Yeah. Any questions? Okay, this is going to be the shortest question and answer session. Yes, thank you. You get a prize. Yeah.
I am Tawfiq Badr Al-Kilani from Sur College of Applied Sciences, Ministry of Higher Education. Thank you for the speakers. I think one element of innovation is statistical information, is marketing. So how we can market our statistical services? That's one question. And same point, I would like ask Mr. Saber Al-Harbi, does the GCC stat have marketing department? Thank you.
Can you repeat the first question again? Second question is easy. Saba, you have the answer, whether you have a marketing department. Can you use some, can you?
How we can market our statistical services in statistical centers.
Okay. Okay. Maybe our statistician can want to have a go. Tom, you want to go, and then Enrique?
It was hard for me to hear the question with the
Okay, how do statistical centers, how should we market our statistical information from our statistical centers?
How to standardize?
No, how to market.
Oh, how to market. Oh, how to market. I think that the only way to market to people who need convincing, as opposed to people who automatically know the importance of statistical information, is to show the value added, whether it be economic value or social value. And so it's challenging. And I think we have examples, certainly in the United States, of poorly constructed statistics, not necessarily by the Census Bureau, where, in fact, there is not value added and there might be value subtracted. So I think it is both responsible conduct of statistical data collection, analysis, and posting, along with marketing. And I think the idea of getting away from statistics and statisticians being boring, but really being an integral part of society and science is the way to go. These words do not automatically make it happen, but I find that in the domains I worked in and still work in for decades, once you have some success, you get advocates and sponsors and champions. And so we have to work, and I'll make one more comment and let others speak, that it also takes the appropriate team so that the statistical knowledge, the domain-specific knowledge, whether it be geospatial or engineering, that you need the right team together to have a chance for success. And we need to be careful not to have only statisticians working because the data are numbers, but if it's a clinical investigation, that there are clinicians involved, so on and so forth. And there's no guarantee, but I think it's the only way to set the scene for success, and then do a good job, and don't be shy about promoting it in the best sense.
Okay, Enrique, and then Vanessa, then Dr. Enrique first. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we don't sell our information. Since INEGI was made autonomous, all the information is provided free to all users. You can download it from internet, and if it's too much, you can request and get it on hard drive or something. But you need to have credibility, and that is provided by the quality and opportunity of information. We find that autonomy has provided or has helped us with that, because we publish data that is not pretty for the government. You know, we provide results on high unemployment or high inflation, and it's published as it comes, and that is in part due to autonomy, and that gives us credibility. That's our sales point.
Okay, credibility is important. Vanessa, you want to say something? And then Dr. Alma, after that.
In the United Kingdom, we have a different model. Basically, my own organization is unfunded by the government, even though we are absolutely 100% owned by the government and we are civil servants. It was a decision by government that if people wanted to use our data, then they should be able to pay for that data. And in fact, we've grown the business from being very, very small to now being a business that's about $200 million US, and it makes a profit of about $50 million a year, and we pay the British government a dividend like you would if you were a private company. It means absolutely we can invest when we need to in the right things. But what we've done is approach things slightly differently, is really try to work with customers
for customers to be able to articulate what is their problem they're trying to solve. And like a very good example was, I was invited to go and address a particular board of a large major corporate in Britain. And this board had started to hear about if they use statistics and geography, they might make more money, but they had no idea what they were doing. And what was interesting was by presenting it, they absolutely understood they had some of their own data, they had authoritative data from the Office of National Statistics, and they had authoritative mapping data from Ordnance Survey. And absolutely within a few minutes of me doing some work, I brought some of their data to life, and they realized they could answer some of their biggest corporate questions. And that is the same for the public sector. And we have a team of about 20 people out of a whole organization of over 1,000, whose job is to support going to see those customers and making the data come alive. And that's the way we do it.
Okay. Dr. Elba?
Yes, sir. I'd like to thank you for asking the question. I think this is the unasked question. We tend, as statisticians, to keep the information for us. There are, in fact, some statisticians within the same organization that will be against marketing. They said our job stops at dissemination. So we shouldn't go beyond dissemination. Otherwise, we'll be biased in doing this, which is just an old school of how to do things. We need to be dynamic in marketing our products. We need to make sure that we utilize all the new technologies, the internet, the websites. But I think would probably be also making use of the new social media. I think that would be the right way, because that's where you feel most of the people are around. That's when you need to push your products and make sure that there are certain messages. You don't market it as they were in terms of tables and charts, but you need to send messages that will be interesting for them to ask for more information, so they go back to you with more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Saha. Microphone. Behind.
Well, first of all, I should thank everybody here on the stage of having such a kind of pioneering presentation, which broadened our mind, and definitely it will extend our products for the new horizon. Departing from Dr. Al-Amer's points, I think we should elaborate a little bit on the allegation, I would say, that having such a kind of innovation and innovative ideas, utilizing some GIS and some other services and statistics, that really will take us to another field in which we will be condemned as not being unbiased, neutral, and statistics should be stopped in just saying this is the data and the dissemination of the data. Behind this is not our business. We are casting away from our traditional field to another field. I understand. I'm a big fan of extending our services consistent with the international trends and international and global change. But I would like from the respected presenter today to shed some lights on such a kind of point, because it is very important to convince our peers to depart from traditional look to a new horizon and more dynamic statistical services. Thank you all.
Thank you, and thank you for that very profound question. I don't know how much time do we still have. Maybe we need another month to discuss this topic. Yeah. But I will give the speakers, a chance to Dr. Elma. We want to reverse the order. We start from you. So we go beyond our traditional boundaries.
I think I mean, my only statement is that we need to get out of the box. We need to think in the big data. We need to think of bigger ideas. We need to think of the objectives of, let's go back to the basics of why we are doing the statistics in the first place. We are doing it, I mean, to serve the government and to serve the public at large within the country. And if we fail to do that, then we have problems. And we need to question whether we should limit ourselves to just statistics, because if we just limit that to statistics, I think the usage of that data will not be to that extent.
Okay. The end justifies the means, and then now Vanessa, your take on this?
Well, first of all, going back to my thinking, you know, each organization within government should be the authority on what they do. How the institutional arrangements are arranged in each country is absolutely down to the country. But there's one thing that links yourselves in the GCC and, you know, my own country and the whole of Europe, is that the generation that's leading these organizations, people like myself, are not the generations coming through. I was recently doing something with the BBC, and they had a lovely example where a child picked up a magazine and started to try and use their finger across it. I was on the plane coming to Amman, just a short hop from Dubai. There were 4 children in the seats adjacent to me. Some of them were really tiny. They must have been under 6 years old. They were all doing this. We have to design our systems. Within 10 years, those same children will be our adults. They will be driving our economies. We have to design, for those of us who are leaders today, we're always designing 5 years in advance. And we mustn't absolutely destroy where we've come from and destroy our authority. But it's a completely different world now. And we've seen how all the modern media influences citizens so fast. And we as professionals have to be part of that modern part to make our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Enrique? Then, and Tom, you have the last word of the session.
Well, yes, we at INEGI, we try to comply by producing statistics and geographical geospatial information. We do very little in terms of analysis because that's our what we are charged to do. However, we do have a research area that does research and analyzes some of the data in forms that will not be controversial and that in principle no other agency is in charge of doing. So we will not get in the way of what others are in charge of doing, but we will do something in terms of, it's called experimental statistics. It's analysis that others will not do.
Tom?
Well, I'll try to be modern and do this in no more than 140 characters so that we can get on to the break. And just add that when I've said marketing, I mean advocacy for the statistical process, for understanding the data, understanding how to use the data and its limits, not advocacy for a specific position or a specific interpretation. And I'll close with a comment that I make at a lot of talks when I'm giving more high-tech talks, and that is that space-age techniques of delivery will not rescue Stone-Age data, so that traditional values still apply. We need to be doing interesting delivery of solid citizen data sets.
Thank you. And, you know, I feel like joining in the debate, but looking at the time, and there's really no time for us. And, but this topic is an important topic, it's a philosophical topic. It's a very important question for the profession as a whole, for us who work in official statistics. Where should we go? But my own view is that we should be, as Dr. Alba said, you know, we are here to help the government, and the government need information, they need decision support, we need to provide them with the information. But that would be a good session for IOS or for ISI and for further discussion in the future. Could be a good, what we call the Friday seminar when I used to be the director of UNST to you know, organize this. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and then I want to thank the speakers, and now this session is adjourned. Thank you so much.
إذن حضورنا الكرام، بهذا نكون قد وصلنا إلى نهاية هذه الجلسة التي تمحورت أوراقها ونقاشاتها حول الابتكارات في مجال الإحصاءات الرسمية. جزيل الشكر نوجهه باسمكم جميعا لنجوم هذه الجلسة الذين أثروا محورها فكرا وخبرة وعرضا ونقاشا: الأستاذ الدكتور بول شونغ من سنغافورة، المدير السابق لشعبة الإحصاء بالأمم المتحدة والمتحدث الرئيسي لهذه الجلسة. والشكر موصول لجميع المتحدثين: الدكتور توماس لويس مساعد مدير إدارة البحوث والمنهجيات في مكتب التعداد الأمريكي بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، والدكتور انريكي ألبا نائب رئيس مجلس المحافظين بالمعهد الوطني للإحصاءات والجغرافيا والمعلومات بالمكسيك، والدكتورة فانيسا لورنس المدير العام والرئيس التنفيذي لمؤسسة أوردنانس سورفي بالمملكة المتحدة، وسعادة الدكتور محمد أحمد العامر عضو مجلس إدارة المركز الإحصائي لدول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية رئيس الجهاز المركزي للمعلومات بمملكة البحرين الشقيقة. إذن والشكر أيضا لكم حضورنا الكرام على مشاركتكم. استراحة لمدة ثلث ساعة فقط، نعود بعدها مع جلسة تلبية الاحتياجات الجديدة في الإحصاء.